Welcome once again to Cinemaholics from the Bay Area, California. I am John Agrodi, editor-in-chief of Cinemaholics. And hey, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. First of all, he's a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, but you all know that. He also reviews films for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hello. I think you are presuming that the listeners are more knowledgeable than they might otherwise be. You don't know.
You think so?
I don't know.
I mean, you've been writing for Cineblend for so long, Will Ashton. You're an institution over there.
I guess. Yeah, it's been a couple of years at this point, so maybe so.
You've been doing great work.
Thank you.
On that note, speaking of great work, right. Abby Olchesky has been doing great work on this show as our co-host, and she's getting a week off. She's not with us this week. She's up to some Abby-related shenanigans, and it's probably fitting because Will and I will not be here next week because of Sundance. And we're going to be engaging in the virtual festival. Still not sure if we're going to have an episode of the show out next week, if Abby's going to be covering things. I don't know, but we'll let you know when we know, but for now, it's just going to be Will and myself covering a bunch of films. Will Ashton, what are some of the movies we're talking about this week for the featured reviews?
For this week, let's see. We're talking News of the World. We're talking In of Itself. We're talking White Tiger. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
And of course, we have some mini reviews as well. If you want to find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive, every episode we've done, it's all on cinemaholics.com, including our written reviews and bonus content. You can write into the show anytime by sending us a quick and friendly email, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. We also have a Patreon. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. It really helps us keep the show afloat. You can find info for that on patreon.com/cinemaholics. And if you want something in return, we also do have merch. You can get hoodies and shirts and Cinemaholics stuff on there as well. Cinemaholics.com is where you can find our merch page. And with that, let's talk about a few off topics before we kick off our mini reviews. First up, we already mentioned it. Sundance is coming. Sundance begins this Thursday. Will, this is your first Sundance Film Festival. I've been covering it for Cinemaholics the last couple of years in a row. But this is your first one. How are you excited? How are you feeling about it so far?
Currently, I'm a little nervous, but I think that's just because I'm not quite sure how it's going to work with like tech and all the different things that are going to be involved with the virtual film festival. But other than that, I'm excited, definitely, because I'm really looking forward to a lot of these movies. I already got a chance to watch a couple. I'm going to watch a couple more as well that I got screeners for before the festivals begin in earnest. But I'm definitely more excited than anything, but I'm nervous that, I don't know, some part of me is anxious that something's not going to work out or that they're going to revoke my Sundance application or something. But that's just my anxiety working up. But I think it's going to be fine. I'm excited.
Ridiculous. They're gonna embrace you with open arms virtually. I'm stoked that we're gonna be able to see probably more films this year than I've been able to cover, particularly on my own. And it's going to be a good time. We're going to have lots of reviews for you all. We're going to have a big old Sundance episode, of course. I haven't been as diligent as you will when it comes to checking out the screeners. I just I've barely had time to watch the movies we're talking about right now. So hopefully I can catch up this week, though. That is the plan. And that's definitely going to be helpful because, there are some really tight turnarounds on this virtual film festival. And for sure, we'll be talking about the Sundance program and how all that stuff works in more detail once we do our big old Sundance shebang.
Yeah.
Also, we want to highlight something. One of our listeners, Cameron, created something really cool on Letterboxd. And so Cameron, a listener of the show, and we'll link this, of course, in the show notes. He put together our top films of 2020. But I'll just read what he put on It's a Letterboxd list, and it says, John, Will, and Abby each chose their top 10 movies of 2020. I then gave each film a score. A movie in the number 10 spot got 1 point, and a movie in the number 1 spot got, in the number 10 spot got 1 point, and a movie in the number 1 spot got 10 points. So I think Cameron's kind of doing what we did previous years, we didn't do this year. If a movie was in multiple spots, he says, then the points got added. So, for example, if Abby had a movie in 4th place and Will had that same movie in 3rd place, it would actually have a higher score than someone's number 1 film. That would only get the 10 points. So this letterbox list has our top 23 movies based on this point system, because these are all films that were in our top 10. And it's really fascinating to see. It's another great perspective on our list. It's similar to what we've done before. We didn't do it this year because we just didn't, I just didn't go to the effort. And
Yeah,
I
you're just
appreciate
being
it.
lazy.
Listener did it though.
You had to like Cameron do all the work for us.
Thank you, Cameron. It's so
Yeah.
cool. We really appreciate it. And now that this is live on Letterboxd, we'll link to it and you can check it out for yourselves. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I believe if I recall correctly, I apologize if I speak out of turn, but I think he did this the past 2 or 3 years before this as well.
Did he?
I think he just, because like you said, we had the points already in the thing, so I think he just had the list set up like the way we had him. But he went above and beyond this year and actually did the work that neither of us did. So that's extra kudos to him for doing that. That's really awesome.
So we have some voicemails to get to this week. Our question is, all right, what is the best Tom Hanks performance? What do you think is the best Tom Hanks performance, Will, off the cuff?
Best or like most iconic?
Best. Which iconic can be part of the criteria, it's like one factor.
I mean, I feel like the one that I think about the most is probably Woody, even though like I don't even really associate Tom Hanks with Woody. I just see Woody from Toy Story. But
Same.
Best, I don't know. I really think he's quite good in Captain Phillips. I think that might be the unexpected answer, but I feel like that's probably his most naturalistic performance. And that's the one that especially when I think back on like his best acting, like that ending scene in Captain Phillips is really impactful for me. I don't know. I might disagree later because that's a tough criteria to choose from, but that's one that comes up to my noggin right now.
Yeah. I think, I'm going to pick Sully just because I want to be mean to you.
You just want to get that knife right in my side.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan. I don't know if we've ever really talked about on the show. I'm not a big fan of Sully, and I guess I'm alone on that island because it's gotten a lot of love over the years, but I'll stick on it. Oh, well.
I think it's hard to determine his best performance. I mean, for me, favorite is much easier to answer. It's like, I think like, movies like Catch Me If You Can are some of my favorite Tom Hanks performances. That Thing You Do, such a great about face for him. And I think, though, one of the ones I think is the most impressive, which maybe is his best, is probably Castaway. Larry Crown? No, not Larry Crown. I did see that in a theater, though.
Oh, really?
I did. Yeah, it was a discount theater, though, to be fair. But okay, so we have several voicemails, a lot of interest in this question from the Cinemaholics community. If you want to leave us a voicemail, check out our page on Swell, the Swell app. You can find that in the show notes. But here are what some of you listeners had to say about the best Tom Hanks performance.
Okay, first and foremost, let me disclaim myself. I'm not the hugest Tom Hanks fan. Never was. I've grown and admired his work over the years later on, but to answer your guys' question, I would have to either go with Sully or Philadelphia as far as acting performance. Now, I will add this, just because I think it's hilarious. When people ask me what my favorite Tom Hanks film is, I always reply with Bachelor Party, because I just think it's the most cheesiest movie, and I just think he's absolutely hilarious in it. And it's just a really funny film. So, and it also really pisses Tom Hanks fans off royally.
Great question, and I really love Tom Hanks. I have to say that Neil brought up a movie that I was not expecting to hear, which is Bachelor Party. And that movie sort of has a soft spot in my heart. I just remember seeing it when I was pretty young, and not that that was a movie I should have been watching when I was very young, but you know how it was back then. I really enjoyed it, but there's so many films to choose from, and I know we're not trying to go for our favorites here, but just to add, my personal favorite film that he's done would probably have to be Big or Forrest Gump. Now, I think that his best performance probably comes in Castaway, in my opinion. I love Robert Zemeckis, and I think that what they did in that film was tremendous. I think that he did an incredible job of carrying that movie.
Now, I know there's a lot of movies here that people are going to say, like Captain Phillips, Sully, Saving Private Ryan, but I wanted to mention something really, really dumb. And it's probably more of an honorable mention or a side note, but over the holiday period, I caught a little of Big, and it just reminded me how much he made me believe that he was actually a little kid. It was just a really brilliant performance, and I think it's trickier than you might think. And you actually believed that he was a 14, 12-year-old kid in that body. And I thought that was kind of remarkable for just the mannerisms, just the tinkering, the restlessness. I thought was just really brilliant, and I actually believed that he was a little kid inside his own body. So I don't know if that's his best performance, but it definitely should at least get a mention. So as I said, I just wanted to throw that stupid little comment in there. And as far as if everybody else is going to throw in their favorite movie, I have one that's off the charts a little bit. I really like The Burbs. I thought The Burbs was a hilarious movie. Definitely not his best performance, but as kind of has a kind of a cult following. I actually loved The Burbs.
For me, just based on performance, and nobody's mentioned this movie yet, because he sort of separates himself from being Tom Hanks in this film, I like the film The Terminal, because I think, obviously, that if you look at The Terminal, he plays somebody who's from a fictitious country, but he's separating himself from Tom Hanks. Now, is it his best performance? Probably not. I would say his best performance is in Forrest Gump, but his best, let's get away from Tom Hanks' performance for a while for me is probably The Terminal.
So we just watched News of the World a few nights ago, and there's a thing happening, I think, right now where we are in this drought of films because of COVID, and that film, it was fine. I didn't dislike it. I didn't love it either. And I look at the reviews, and I think it was around, Rotten Tomatoes 90%. I think it was pretty even with both critics and audience. And I don't know that I would put it there. Like I said, it's fine. But there was a bit that Eddie Murphy used to do about, if you've been out in the desert, a cracker tastes like the greatest thing in the world to you. I think that's kind of what's happening with some of the films that have gotten these incredible reviews, and I'm not seeing it. I'm not feeling it. I kind of like Hanks the most, I think, in The Green Mile. Now I don't know if that's just because out of all of his films, that's one of my favorites. I don't know that his performance. The thing about Hanks, I don't think of him as a great actor. I just think of him as, oh, it's Tom Hanks. We know what we're going to get here. It's going to be a serviceable performance. Your jaw's not going to be on the floor, And I think that's what it is with him. And I feel like I'm shit talking the guy, and I don't mean to be doing that because I generally enjoy, he has a body of work. I enjoy a lot of it. And in fact, you go back to stuff like Phil mentioned, The Burbs, or as Bachelor Party was mentioned, and I think of The Money Pit and those kind of goofy 80s movies. I really kind of enjoyed his work in those things, but and his serious work is obviously very well done too. I just don't think of him when somebody says great actor, Tom Hanks doesn't come to mind. He's not one of the names that jumps out at me. So I'm going to say The Green Mile. I'll second Castaway. That was pretty good because he's alone. That's, I assume, pretty hard to do. Not that I've ever acted before. But yeah, those two. Everybody was all excited about what was it? Won't You Be My Neighbor or something? I didn't think that was very good at all.
So, Will Ashton, I can kind of hear you clenching your fists over that last take. How are you doing? How are you recovering from that?
I almost agree with the respect that I do think there are a lot of movies out right now that because of COVID in 2020 are probably being overestimated. I don't know if I'd put News of the World there necessarily. We haven't even really talked about it yet, but I don't know. I still got to vouch for Won't You Be My Neighbor. I think that's not only a really good film, but I think he's generally he does a very good job with that, and that gets to something that I think the other callers were addressing, which is that Tom Hanks is very good at making very hard performances look very natural and easy. And that also includes News of the World. Like, I think he's not only just a very charismatic actor to the point where he can make, like, you know, seemingly banal things like reading the news very investing and fun, but also just like we were saying, like pull off these kind of tricky tonal balances with a movie like Big that, you know, like another actor, if they didn't get that performance right, that would just be such an odd and uncomfortable little movie to watch. But because Tom Hanks has that kind of natural joy and charisma as a performer, he pulls it off very well. So yeah, very versatile actor, and I'm a big fan of Won't You Be My Neighbor personally, but teach their own.
Same, totally. But thank you everybody who sent in a voicemail using the Swell app. You can follow us on Swell to take part in these conversations. And yes, when you leave a voicemail, as you can kind of tell, other people can listen to your voicemail already on the app, and they can respond to some of your picks, which is one of the more fun things about it. So definitely check that out. It's in the show notes as always. But with that, let's start doing some mini reviews. We just have a couple to get to before we do our big review for News of the World, and then a few others on top of that. Our first one here is a film called Our Friend, which actually came out in 2019. I believe it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. So September of not this past year, but the one previous. And I'm not sure if it was supposed to get like any sort of like theatrical release or anything like in the following 2020 kerfuffle. I'm not entirely sure, but no, it's coming out here in January. You can actually get early access to it right now, so it's available to rent for, I believe, like the premium $19.99. And so that's what I did. I checked out Our Friend. I paid good money to see it, Will Ashton.
You're a good friend.
I'm a good friend to the actors in this. This is directed by Gabriella Cowperthwaite. I'm not familiar with her previous work, but I do know she did the film Blackfish, which I remember seeing, but I don't, that documentary.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So she's been done more of like a documentary.
Yeah.
I think her last one was a documentary. She might have done one more. I'm not entirely sure if she did another film before Our Friend. That said, I'm definitely not someone who went into Our Friend with like, you know, very specific expectations. I wasn't sure what to expect
any expectations here. I mean, I know I mentioned this as a possible movie, and you're kind of putting it off a little bit. You were like, I don't know about that. We had to like come up with a different one in its place. But yeah, you ended up watching the film. So what'd you think? Well,
to be fair, Will, I did tell you that I would probably see it. You know, I wasn't writing it off or dismissing it or anything. In fact, you know, when I saw the cast and everything, because I was not as aware of this film before you had brought it up, and then I saw, okay, so Jason Segel, Dakota Johnson, and Casey Affleck, who I have very nuanced opinions of all three of those actors. I hold Dakota Johnson up pretty high esteem compared to the others, as people remember from my review of The High Note. And I think Jason Segel is one of those actors who, like, man, when he's good, he is great. And when he's not good, he's just kind of okay. I don't think he's ever terrible or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything where like I thought he was bad. Yeah. Is there a movie you're thinking of in particular, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, you know, I'm kind of going back and forth with a few. You know, I'm thinking of like The Discovery. And
I like Discovery, but yeah.
It's not bad or anything.
It's okay. It's just
Sex Tape.
Yeah, that one. Okay, that one's fair.
You know,
yeah.
I think his standout performances, I think for sure would be things like, you know, How I Met Your Mother and Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Yes.
Definitely my favorite performance.
The End of the Tour, for me personally, I thought that was quite good.
Which one?
The End of the Tour. David Foster Wallace.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I thought he was quite good in that.
Really great performance, really great movie. Yeah, and so you know, Jason Segel, he's definitely more hit or than miss, but sometimes I just feel like he's miscast. Like I feel like sometimes directors put him in roles that he's not really suited for, or they try to like, I don't know, try to leverage his acting talents around like a certain persona that just he doesn't like click with as easily. And that said, Casey Affleck, I feel like this is a great time for a Casey Affleck movie, considering, you know, all of the Affleck stuff that's been happening in the news. But once again, Affleck, you know, there are certainly some like problematic things concerning him as a person and his personal life and things he's been accused of doing. But like with Manchester by the Sea, you know, he's such a great performer that you kind of forget about that stuff when you're watching the film, for better or worse. And this is a really fascinating movie. It's based on a novel, and I say it's fascinating because it plays as like a dramedy almost the entire time, but it's kind of like the gritty reboot of 50-50, even though 50-50 wasn't like, it's not that it wasn't that gritty or anything.
Yeah.
But it's think 50-50, but it takes cancer much more seriously. Not that it didn't take cancer seriously. It's weird.
Right. See, I thought this was like the serious version of I Love You, Man. Maybe because Jason Segel's in it, but I didn't know anything about the plot. I just knew that the three actors were involved. So that's an interesting turn of events for sure. Yeah, it's I was expecting it to be more I Love You, Man, like the dynamic between these two friends to be more pronounced, but it's very subtle. It's more of like the indie version of I Love You, Man mixed with the indie version of 50-50. It's aggressively indie. It's a long film, 2 hours and 6 minutes. The plot, which I've been taking forever to get to, is that Dakota Johnson and Casey Affleck's characters are like high school / college sweethearts. They've been married for a long time. They have two beautiful girls, and the film kind of takes place over like different time periods. So like it opens with the news that Dakota Johnson's character Nicole is she's terminal. They've known that she's been diagnosed with cancer, but they know she's going to die. The film opens with them breaking that news to their daughters, but then the film is like it's definitely, it's not in order. Then you go back to like 2004, whatever it was, when Casey Affleck's character met Jason Segel's character, how they become friends. You kind of see Casey Affleck's career kind of progress. You see what their lives are like, right after the diagnosis, a year after the diagnosis, then it goes to like 2 years before the diagnosis. And it's all to sort of like paint this story of like how these three people's lives intersect and what they mean to each other. It's about friendship. It's about dealing with tragedy or impending tragedy. And it has really complicated and tricky stuff to say about cancer and about what it's like to slowly lose a loved one. And it's one of those movies that like I could easily see somebody watching this and not buying into it and not getting sucked into it because of the subject matter, because of the way it really kind of goes on. And it could be looked at sort of like it's a little miserable at times. But then I think the way this film ebbs and turns and it discovers new things about these well-written characters that in my case, I didn't see coming. I finished this film and I had cried about 2/3 into it. I just started weeping. And as the film was ending, like as the credits were coming up, Will, I'm just going to be really personal with you and thousands of other people right now. I was sobbing for about 10 minutes straight after this movie. Like I just had a breakdown. Like I've never cried like that over a movie ever. Like I've teared up. I've felt stuff, but I've never just found myself like uncontrollably sobbing and I can't contain myself. And so I don't know why this movie did that to me, because it doesn't seem like it's really doing that to a lot of other people. After the film, I kind of, I poked around to see what other people are saying about it. And I'm just seeing lots of like, B-, people not disliking it necessarily, but like, definitely not being high up on the film. I don't know why, but this really hit me. It's, I think partly because I didn't know it was based on a true story. Okay.
And until the end. And I think a lot of people do know it's based on a true story. So like, I don't feel like that's a spoiler, but like when you find out kind of some of the more details around that and just the fact that this really happened and these characters really did these things, just something about my connection to them, like exponentially blew up in my head. And I think that's just like what brought me to like this moment. And so I definitely recommend this film with caveats. I'm a B+ on it. My caveat is just that, if you struggle with this subject matter, it might be a really tough watch, and it's not easy. It doesn't glamorize what cancer is like on everybody involved. And like, it doesn't just show the more like melodramatic parts, right? Where, you really see the deterioration of a person over the course of 2 hours. And it's just so tragic, especially because it cuts back to when she's not deteriorating. And you see her like in what looks like full health. And yeah, it's just one of those films that is really going to stick with me. And I'm not sure why I connected with it in a way that I certainly didn't expect, in a way that doesn't seem like most other people are, but I definitely did. And as far as 2021 films go, it's one of my favorites of the year so far. And I give it a big old B plus. And well, I know we talked before the show, and we were discussing like what our third film would be to talk about, and I kind of had a feeling between this and In and of Itself, I thought it would make more sense for you to pick the latter, but I hope you someday get to this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly more curious than I was before. Not that I wasn't interested, but I was just kind of like, yeah, maybe we could do this one because I didn't know what else we could do. But yeah, I was hearing kind of mixed of positive things like you were saying before, so I wasn't 100% sure what the quality of it is. But yeah, it's encouraging to hear. But what about people like me who are robots? Are they going to be affected by this, or are they going to be?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
I really don't know. I feel like what I would expect based on what I know about your taste, I see you being like a B- on it. Maybe I feel like you'll probably connect the characters. You probably really like Jason Segel's performance in it and what happens. But I think the length will probably get to you.
Sure.
And I think your inability to process human emotion. No,
yes, that'll be a big deterrence for me. I have to imagine. Yes.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of the better films based on an article, though.
Oh yeah, this is based on an Esquire article, right?
Yeah, called the Friend, which came out in 2015.
Yeah, I got an email about that, and I was like, I wonder if that's connected to the film. So I guess it is. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I just like how you're just like, oh, I don't know. I guess we have to pick a movie or whatever, John, and then John watches it and has a breakdown, like so casually. Yeah. Oh man.
Oh man. Well, that's how it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, not too dissimilar to a film we're going to be talking about later, I guess. But there we go. Yeah. So, I'll move on to. You want me to start with
You've got some kind of heaven. Let's talk about it. You have been wanting me to watch this one.
I have, yeah.
The documentary, right?
Yeah, so this is a documentary that premiered at last year's Sundance. This is about the Villages, which is a retirement community in Florida. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I know there was an article about it in Politico. I want to say in 2018. That was how I first became familiar with it. And basically, it's considered like this sort of geriatric Disneyland place where it's this big, extravagant part of the state where all these retirees go to basically live out their final years or days in whatever sort of corporate American dream fantasy they can. So like there's like everything you could possibly want corporate wise in this little place. Like there's like pools, there's different clubs, there's tons of golf courses. Like I think there's like 80 something golf courses there. Just like an absurd, like whatever your wildest imagination of like a dreamland for retirees would be, that's basically what the Villages is like.
I can just imagine Dick Johnson like sweating as he hears that.
Pretty much, yes. But yeah, the movie itself, which is the directorial debut of Lance Oberheim, who is, I believe, a like journalist from the New York Times that just got his first film with this. We follow about like 4 or 5 different personalities in this little geriatric wonderland. And from what we can see, pretty much, even though they have all this extravagance around them, they aren't happy because the material wealth just doesn't really provide more than what they're really looking for, which is some sort of contentment in this like final part of their lives. And so we follow basically this couple that's sort of on the outs because the husband is like experimenting with drugs and like doing all these kind of wild criminal activities. And the wife is just kind of like concerned watching this the whole time. We have this other character who is, kind of on the outskirts of the Villages. And he also has sort of a criminal past as well. But he's just trying to find like his safe haven through this sort of exotic little part of Florida, even though that's maybe not exactly what the Villages is for. And one of the other big subjects of the film is this woman who is kind of more on the working class side of the village, and she does all these jobs, and she's really certainly the most relatable and most sympathetic person here because she's clearly, trying not just to find the American dream, but to find like a decent life for herself. And also to find a romantic partner in the final few days or years of her life. And she is not quite finding what she wants either for different reasons. And so that makes it sound a lot more, I think, depressing than the movie really is because the movie itself, like it has a very kind of dry and almost sort of ironic sense of humor. The filmmaker here, he's only 24. I believe when he made the film, he was like 22. So he comes at this from a very sort of like acute perspective where he's very inquisitive. He allows the subjects to be very open about their lives and their personal struggles, but he also kind of sees through the BS at the same time. He's able to recognize just the plasticity of this whole place and just the absurd kind of contradictions of this environment, and it makes her, I think, a very good contradiction, and also an oddly very emotionally resonant one by the end. And I say that oddly because the movie itself, I don't think they quite address it enough, but the Villages was very much a like Trump land. And this is something that the documentary I wish would explore more, because this is what the article from Politico did, was that they recognize that, like, because they kind of live in this safe haven where they kind of have this outside perspective of the world, like they don't quite see it for the way the way it is basically. They have these sort of outsized political perspectives that obviously I think are a little bit more influential than some reporters are otherwise predicting. But the movie itself is pretty much just recognizing them as just people and not really beyond their political beliefs, which I think is for the better and worse at the same time. I know some listeners don't really like it when we discuss politics, so I won't dive into that too much.
What
but
are you talking about? It's their favorite topic.
Yes, yes, it is.
We have all of these Apple Podcast reviews of people praising our political insights.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would have given it a little bit more perspective, and I think a little bit more of an understanding of who these people are, and maybe recognize with some of their faults. But at the same time, I think because Lance Oberheim, this film is just more interested in looking at like who these people are, not just politically or economically, but just like as like these jaded personalities who just want to find something on an emotional and intellectual level. I recognize that. I think he just didn't want that to be tainted because he's so interested in kind of presenting this like bubble mentality. But nevertheless, I really do like this film, and it's one of my favorites of the year because it just presented in such a fun but also emotionally resonant way that I'm definitely trying to get more people to watch it, because it's just like a quirky but very endearing little movie, and it shows great promise for this freshman filmmaker. I should also mention that it's produced by Darren Aronofsky, so it does also have a nice little visual presentation. Basically, the way I've described it is like it's sort of like if Errol Morris decided to document a bunch of like Harmony Korine characters in The Beach Bum. That's sort of like what you can expect here. So
I feel like you've been using Harmony Korine to like describe a lot of movies lately.
I think just two, right?
Second one.
I know I described Harmony Korine when I just talked about Blade Nose Empty Pocket.
Yes,
but
yes,
which does have some similarities to this film as well, admittedly. Although this one, it's not a pseudo documentary. This is actual documentary. I should make clear if I'm going to compare it to Blade Nose Empty Pocket. But,
right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to give away more than that because I just think it's a very interesting and intriguing little film. And I definitely think it was one that was appropriate to watch at the end of the Trump era, because I think it presented a lot of things that I think were pretty apparent by that point about the era and just like the perspective of it. But at the same time, I think it is accessible beyond the politics of it. So,
well, when did you see it exactly?
I would have seen it, I think, like a week from today, because I saw it just before we recorded, or I finished it just after we recorded our last episode. So
that would have been wild if you had seen it like right before or right after like Trump literally like retired down to Florida.
Yeah.
But yeah, you missed it.
I mean, you could have that advantage. I mean, it's playing at a lot of virtual cinemas right now, so you can. Yeah. It's pretty easy to find, and I think it's worth it. It's only like 83 minutes as well, so it's a pretty quick watch. If that butters the bread a little bit. But yeah, that's some kind of heaven. I quite liked it. I'd probably give it a high B+.
Oh wow, high B+. Very cool. And you have one more mini review to get to. I mean, I know you did see The Croods 2, which you caught up on. That came out a while back, so
sure.
We don't have to get into The Croods 2. We kind of missed our window for that. But you saw something else called The Marksman, which I thought about checking out, but this looked kind of dull to me. It's an action thriller starring Liam Neeson, which that at this point, it's like Boy Who Cried Wolf, Boy Who Cried Liam to me. It's like, okay. He's in another action movie. Sure. Let me know if it's good. I'm probably not going to take the risk, but was I right to avoid this target?
I mean, I should preface that the reason I saw this and The Croods was because they were playing at the drive-in. I needed to get out of my house a little bit, and I felt this was the safest way to do so while also catching up on news of the world. So, yeah, I took advantage of the opportunity, and I will say, fittingly enough, The Marksman is a kind of appropriate film to lead into news of the world because they have some very weird similarities in that they're both, about these kind of older figures who are in a Western setting, and they have to take care of a young child during dangerous forces that are surrounding them. So, like in terms of like the general plot, they are kind of weirdly very similar. But as far as the movie itself, yeah, I mean, as like you mentioned, pretty much, it's not that it's bad. It's just that it's super mediocre to the point where there's nothing that does exceptionally well and nothing that does exceptionally poor. That you just it just ultimately in this weird sort of limbo state where it's obviously trying to harken back to a lot of like older Clint Eastwood movies, or at least semi-recent Clint Eastwood movies like Unforgiven and Gran Torino, most notably. And that's not incidental because the director is Robert Lorenz, I believe. He previously worked as an AD for Clint Eastwood on a number of films, and he also directed Trouble with the Curb, the baseball film you may or may not remember, which was similarly pretty mediocre as well. Yeah, I mean, as a movie, like, you know, the central core dynamic between Liam Neeson and the child actor Jacob Perez, it's fine for what it is, but it's not like exceptionally funny or heartfelt beyond like what you've seen in other films in this vein. And like I said, like having this before News of the World just kind of emphasize, I think, more of what this movie does, just pretty so throughout. So it's one that's like, I'm not like gonna badger it too much because I don't think it's necessarily terrible or awful. I just think it's so inconsequential that I just don't think it's going to leave much of an impact, which I guess is even more damning than if I were just to pan it, because like, you know, that it would be more impressionable. This is just sort of like, it's so kind of banally mediocre that like it just didn't have any impact really at all on me. So yeah, I mean, I won't badger it more beyond that. I think it's just a moderate C type film. Like I didn't get too much out of it, but I didn't hate the experience of it. I would like to see more of Liam Neeson in this kind of Clint Eastwood vehicle, because I do think, you know, he's been playing a lot of like widowers who are trying to like kind of claim their stake in life, and I know that these projects can be very personal for him for reasons you can look up elsewhere, and I feel like there's a really good film in there. I think he got pretty close with The Gray, and like you said, he's been doing kind of a lot of these type of films, and I feel like the better ones, like just on the outskirts, just kind of waiting to come out. Walk on the Tombstone is another one I liked a good bit, but yeah, ultimately this one is just another kind of forgettable so one that you might check out on Redbox, maybe you won't, but either way, it's not going to make a big impact on your life, and that's it.
Is it is it at least like a dad enough movie though? Like I could recommend it to the dads of the world who like, okay, they're not looking for anything that fancy.
I mean, like I said, like it's so similar to News of the World, which is also a very dad film, that I feel like if you go to Redbox and News of the World is out, like there's no copies of it left in the box, you could pick up this one, and I think you'll be fine
consolation
with it.
prize.
Right. It's like a fine.
I gotta have a January dad movie.
Yeah. Like if that's the case, I think, you know, it's okay, it's fine, but I don't really think it's going to make much of an impact regardless of that.
Got it. All right. Well, that is the Marksman, and I think you said like a C, right?
Yeah, it's just a C.
All right. Well, that'll do it for our mini reviews. Our next 3 films are all reviews because we both have watched them. And we're going to start off with the film. We've alluded to it quite a bit. It's apparently on our minds. And that is the new film starring Tom Hanks, which is News of the World.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd, and I'm here tonight to read the news from across this great world of ours.
So they pay you to tell stories. I ain't never heard of that as a thing a man could do.
It's not a rich man's occupation, as you can see.
Hey! Stop! Stop! I'm not gonna hurt you!
You understand English?
Sorry, I can't, but,
Friend. It says your name is Johanna Leonberger. Indians took you when they attacked your family 6 years prior. The mother, father, and sister were... well, they passed.
It was directed and co-written by Paul Greengrass. He also did the screenplay. It is based on a novel by Paulette Giles, I think is how you say her last name. And yeah, it stars Tom Hanks along with a someone I'm not as familiar with. I think it might be her first role, but Helena Zengel, who is a very young German child actress. Yeah.
Is this her debut?
I think this is her debut,
Okay.
but sometimes I say that and like it's technically the debut, but then somebody will be like, well, slow your roll, Negroni, because she was in a short film, whatever. So like I try not to speak too broadly. You never know.
Feature debut, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll double check it, but I'm
Who
pretty
knows?
sure. Yeah.
She was in a commercial. Yeah. Cinemaholics being irresponsible again. But anyway, so News of the World. It is about a Civil War veteran who he goes from town to town reading the news. And when he goes to these towns, it's all in Texas. So they are in like, the former Confederacy, which is now occupied by Union soldiers trying to keep the peace. Things are very volatile. The people living in these communities, it's a Western. They have very little to scrape together. They work all day. They live in like hostile territory. There's lots of skirmishes with the Kiowa population, the Native Americans who are more of a warrior tribe in this area. And throughout the film, and as we're introduced to the character, we see Tom Hanks as this man, Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd, which is a beautiful name. Every single time we hear his name, I'm like, yes.
See, my takeaway from that was that I feel like Paul Greengrass, if he has Tom Hanks in movies, like, well, he has to be a captain. Like, I'm not bringing him to my set if he's not a captain.
Yeah. No. Look, you are the captain now.
There you go.
So that's the situation. So like I mentioned, it's just a few years after the Civil War. Clearly, Captain Kidd has some demons. He has a wife he left in San Antonio, but he used to be a newspaper man. Now he reads the news to people because as he explains, like these people don't have time to read the news. They don't have time. They work all day. They work from sun up to sundown. And so they go into these like large communal areas. It's like the Facebook of the 19th century, basically. And you have like one person interpreting the news basically as a pundit.
Yeah.
And sort of giving like, here's the news, here's what's going on. He brings up local news, he talks about federal news, and it's very relatable because there's audible groans from the audience when he mentions here's what's going on in DC, and it's like, oh my gosh, relatable. But and then as the film unfolds, he comes across a young woman who was a captive of the Kiowa, and she has kind of lost touch with her German upbringing, and she grafted onto the Kiowa culture, but through a series of circumstances, she ended up back in the hands of the Texas, I guess they're the Texas government or whatever it was, I forget. And it's now on him to try to safely transport her back because the person who was trying to return her to her original home was killed. And that's kind of the setup for News of the World. It feels like two things that aren't that similar. It's like a guy brings news to the world, and then he tries to safely he's a veteran. He tries to bring a young girl back to where she came from in Texas. And it's a story. It's a touching story. It's got action. It's Paul Greengrass, of course, and it's a heck of a Tom Hanks performance. But what did you think of News of the World, Will Ashton?
I mean, I was the one that proposed we do it this week because I was really looking forward to it. And unfortunately, before this, I hadn't had a chance to see it because it was primarily in theaters at that point.
It came out, I forgot to mention, it came out December 25th, so Christmas Day, so we weren't able to talk about it. It did come out on Netflix and a bunch of like international countries, just not here in the US. Right. And it got good reviews. We just, we just now are able to see it ourselves.
Right. But so it has a lot of things I really like. I mean, obviously I'm a big fan of Westerns. Who doesn't like Tom Hanks besides those listeners?
I was about to say it, you beat me too.
And it's a news movie, which obviously, I mean, not that I love The Post, but obviously Tom Hanks telling the news is obviously going to be very intriguing to me, especially in a Western setting. So I
genuinely forgot he was in The Post. Was he in The Post?
Was he the lead of the Post, right? With him, Meryl Streep?
I remember Meryl Streep. I don't remember him at all, which that kind of tells you something about that movie, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I thought The Post was fine. I liked it, but I mean, it's not one that left much of an impression on me, except when I was watching News of the World and I remembered The Post, and I was like, oh yeah, The Post. That was a movie.
I don't know. When I think of The Post, I think of Meryl Streep and Bob Odenkirk. I don't think of Tom Hanks.
Whatever. But in any case, I mean, I had, I guess, fairly decent expectations going into this, and I'll say that I met most of them, just because I do like that Paul Greengrass is expanding himself a little bit. For one, he finally bought a tripod so that he has a steady cam for this, which is very refreshing to see. But no, I mean, just like genre wise, it's nice to see like an old fashioned mid budget Western like this again. We see so many movies that are like trying to be like Western adjacent, like, you know, like they take on different elements, or something like Cowboys and Aliens, where it's like, you know, trying to be a Western for like 20 minutes, and it's like, now it's an alien movie. And like, I really respect this movie for just being like a traditional old fashioned Western with a, you know, star that we're used to seeing in a very contemporary fashion, expanding himself to be, you know, have that kind of old fashioned dad-esque charisma in this traditional style. But the movie itself, I think it's very fine. It's very sweet in its approach, but I don't think the story does that much that we haven't seen from either Tom Hanks or other movies in this vein. Like, obviously, like there's like True Grit, and even like I said, like the Marksman and Gran Torino, like other films like in this vein that have touched on this kind of like unconventional father-daughter relationship that, you know, it's done very respectfully, and it's done in a way that's very mature and nuanced. And so I can definitely can see the dad movie appeal of that. But I don't know if this is one that's going to leave a firm or lasting impression on me because of that. It might just be like The Post, like we were saying, like a film that I like at the time and then kind of move on because of that. But as far as just looking at the film as a film, I think it's well done. It's accomplished. I really like the photography of the film a lot, especially a lot of the vistas and different just shots in, you know, the old Grand West. But the movie itself, I from a story level, I think it does what it needs to do, and I think it's touching, and it kept my interest throughout. But I don't think it's enough to like really reach the heights of what my expectations were.
I'm definitely liking this a bit more then, because I really enjoyed it, and I do agree. Like, as you're watching it, it's pretty easy to notice that, yes, in terms of the genre, the Western genre, there's nothing really going on here below the surface. Like, there's nothing really all that deep about it. There's nothing subversive about it, which, you know, I understand. Like, you know, sometimes when I watch Westerns, that is something that I want. Sometimes we get films like Hostels, which I think is that in a bad way, where it's like, not only is there nothing going on under the surface, it's not even executed well enough to be all that lasting. It's just so. But with this film, I think that it really does carry its weight in every other area. You know, I guess that is kind of a pun, but, you know, just the fact that like it is a slow burn, but it does keep your interest throughout. Like, it's really well directed. I think like the pacing of it, you know, as a novel, it could have felt really sluggish. It could have felt like it's kind of meandering a bit. But I thought that the character progression was actually really believable. It's one of the few Westerns where I think the third act is really good without just having to devolve into like crazy action scenes.
Yeah, I agree.
It does. I loved that. I loved that it was just a little bit more authentic. You know, there was a resolution that had more to do with people than it did with gunslinging, which to me was like a small inversion of the genre. And I think the reason I like this so much is just because I think it's very rare these days to get Westerns that, you know, with the exception of things like True Grit, which, you know, yeah, true standout of the decade, like one of the great modern Westerns. But in terms of this one, I think what it still accomplishes in its own right is its ability to actually be very limited in its scope, but have like a similar amount of stakes. We have a shootout here that is so nail biting, even though, like, I just felt like I knew every detail of the shootout. I knew where everybody was. I knew the staging. I knew like basically how many bullets were left. And I thought the ingenuity to try to get out of that situation was unique. And I was just so excited by this action scene compared to a lot of other action scenes that throw so much at you. And yeah, it was stuff like that just ended up really sticking out for me. It was so effective for me.
No, I agree. I mean, I do think the build up to action scene's a little weird. Like, it just kind of feels like, oh, now we're in an action scene, I guess, just because it goes against the tone and the pacing of the film prior to that. But I do agree that, like, I think the film is able to be very patient and move at a fairly kind of gradual, thoughtful pace, but it never feels completely boring or isolating because of that. Paul Greengrass is an accomplished filmmaker, and that he's able to take these kind of more downbeat and mature themes, but present them in a way that are very accessible and endearing and ultimately emotionally resonant. And I think that's really a testament to him as a director, especially because I think I didn't see the one he did for Netflix, but I know prior to this he did that Jason Bourne like
Yeah.
sequel reboot thing, and that wasn't
the 2016
yeah.
one, and then I don't think he did the reboot that was with like Jeremy Renner though.
No, he didn't. But I meant the one with Matt Damon. That was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
in my opinion, that was even worse than the Jeremy Renner one, because I remember actually kind of liking the Jeremy Renner one. But in any case, it feels like Paul Greengrass has kind of been on the outs for a bit. And it was nice to see, I don't think this is a full return to form for him. Like, I don't think this is like a new United 93 or something like that. But it is nice to see him, on his game again, and clearly, presenting this in a style that is new to him, but has his intensity and his attention to character that is present in his better work. And I mean, I think this is like a solid B-level film for him. Like, I don't think it matches his best stuff, but I can definitely see the craftsmanship, and there's a lot to appreciate there.
Yeah, I'll admit he's never been my favorite director. I mean, we talked about Captain Phillips a little bit. I like Captain Phillips, but I don't know. I feel like I've never loved one of his movies. I don't know if I really love News of the World, but I think News of the World is probably going to end up being my favorite film from him. And I know people really like the Bourne films, but I've just never really connected with them. I there's something about Bourne Supremacy, and I think you did Bourne Ultimatum as well, where those films I just didn't like the handheld aspect of it. I didn't like the cinematography. I thought the mystery of it wasn't that interesting, just to me. And I know I'm an outlier. I know most people really love those films and enjoy them, but I would take his action sequences, limited as they are in News of the World, over any of them, for the reasons that I think were more apparent to me in Jason Bourne. And I think the only film you and I have talked about from him, like on the show, was probably 22 July, which was okay, I guess. Like it was just kind of like, I just remember being really bummed out by that movie.
Well, that's the Netflix one I was referring to. I couldn't think of the title. I didn't see that one.
Oh, that was Netflix?
Yeah, I believe so, right? Wasn't it Netflix?
I don't remember.
I think
so long ago. It was so long ago, 3 years ago, not even. But yeah, I'm just not his biggest fan. But whatever he's doing in News of the World, I don't know if it's a return to form. For me, I would just constitute it as, I felt like he just did something kind of different that I responded to. And I think a big reason that I respond to it is because this is definitely my favorite Tom Hanks performance in a minute. I like Sully, I like Captain Phillips, as we mentioned, and Bridge of Spies, I think, was like, until now, was like probably my favorite Tom Hanks performance, because even though I really liked Won't You Be My Neighbor, I kind of do agree with the main point of that caller, which was it did feel a little bit like Tom Hanks was just kind of being him in like Fred Rogers getup, which I think was the point. I don't think he was trying to act, that much for that role.
I kind of agree that he's putting a Tom Hanks flair on that, but I don't agree that he's not acting in it. But
maybe that's too harsh. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a bad performance. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I didn't feel like he became Fred Rogers. I feel like he was doing something important for the film, and the film works, I think, in maybe, I don't know if it's in spite of or because of how he's handling the Fred Rogers character, either in a subtle way or he's not trying too hard, which I think it works to the film's favor. Do not get me wrong. But this performance, this is the kind of performance where like I was not thinking about Tom Hanks at all. Like I was thinking about Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd and how much I cared about him and this girl and this journey they're on. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of this one. I really like it. So I'm a pretty solid B+ on News of the World. For me, it's not fake news.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not too far off from where you are. I definitely value a lot of what you were talking about. I guess my only point of contention would just be that I like Tom Hanks in this. I didn't love his performance. I like what he's doing as far as like kind of going against his like natural charisma and trying to be a little bit gruff, a little bit harder to read, like someone who is obviously like a little distant outside of his stage presence and just trying to connect with something that he lost long ago. But yeah, I guess for me, the difference is that with Won't You Be My Neighbor, even though like that's a very Tom Hanks take on Fred Rogers, like I was just thinking of Fred Rogers while I was watching it. I wasn't thinking like this is Tom Hanks playing Fred Rogers. But with this, I was thinking like this is Tom Hanks playing a sort of like John Wayne. Well, not even John Wayne as like I don't know, just like a traditional kind of Western vein that I think it fits him well. Like it's nice to see something like this from him because we haven't seen a Western from Tom Hanks before. But I think he does it well. But I never fully look past the performance of it, with the exception of the end scene, which is kind of similar to Captain Phillips, not the very end scene, but like a scene he has with Bill Camp that, in a style similar to Captain Phillips, like when he just has to like kind of be in his feels and just really connect with his emotional side. He's just very good doing that in a natural, like not super showy way. That I think is really a testament to him as an actor, as a dramatic actor especially. But yeah, I mean, like I said before, I really like the execution, the photography of this. Like, it's nice to see a mature dad Western film that isn't like, like trying to be something else, just very clearly trying to be a traditional, no nonsense Western, but also be very emotionally engaging and, reserved in its approach, but also connecting in a very human way to these down and out characters. And I can always respect a Western that's doing that, especially on this scale, because we're probably not going to get a lot of movies like this from here on forward. And it's nice that Tom Hanks is trying to get them made nevertheless. But yeah, I mean, for me, I guess I'm a low B on it. Like I like the experience of it. It was nice to see a movie like this at the drive-in, but I don't think it's one that's going to stick with me beyond just being like, oh yeah, that was a good film and I enjoyed it. Kind of similar to The Post. So a nice kind of low, but nevertheless solid B for me.
All right, low B for Will, a pretty solid B plus for me. Yeah, it just sounds like we disagree on a few things on this one, but it definitely sounds like we both enjoyed the film quite a bit compared to some other Western films, I suppose, and some other action films of this nature that have come out. I definitely was pleasantly surprised myself. But yeah, and I know Abby saw this. I know she liked it and she talked about it on the show. So yeah, I'm glad we had a chance to discuss it as well between ourselves. I wasn't sure if we would ever get to News of the World. It's kind of crazy how it came out. It kind of came and went. And I wonder if this one is going to find an audience moving forward.
I do think it's going to probably do well at the Academy because it seems like a traditional Academy Awards
possibly
type film.
Yeah.
I think it's going to do better than the pundits are expecting at this point. Probably because a lot of them haven't seen it, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's got some Oscar attention for sure.
Let's move on to our next film of the week, and that is a new Netflix film. So this one's full Netflix, not just internationally. It is The White Tiger, which is also based on a novel. A lot of novel adaptations and article adaptations this week. Yeah, but this one is based on Aravind Adiga's 2008 novel, which is also called The White Tiger. This was directed by Ramin Barani. It stars Arash Gurav. I'm sure I'm butchering those pronunciations. I apologize. Along with him, he stars with Rajkumar Rao and Priyanka Chopra. I think she's definitely the biggest name stateside compared to some of these actors. Because we've seen her in a lot of things. I think probably her big thing would be Quantico, I suppose. Was she in Quantico? Is that the right person I'm thinking of? I hope I don't have that wrong.
I mean, I haven't watched Quantico, but I'm pretty sure that's a show she's famous for.
I've never seen it either. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the one. And she's like married to Nick Jonas and all that. But
yeah, I didn't want to specify that because I feel like that'd be kind of dismissive to associate with her husband. But yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm just referring to how people would know her and everything. Yeah, it's not, it's not all there is to her, of course. But anyway, that said, this film is interesting. It's kind of like, it starts off as like kind of a dark sort of narrative, or not dark, sorry. It kind of starts off as like sort of a light rags to riches story, and then it like gets darker as it goes. It is about a young servant who is writing to I think the Chinese prime minister, who is going to come visit in India, and he proceeds to write a letter, and that's the voiceover narration for this entire movie of him explaining where he comes from and how he got to where he is today, and some of the circumstances that led him to not being able to get an education, even though he was extremely intelligent for his age, and how he falls under the thumb of the upper caste, or the high caste, I forget what it was called in this film, and some of the dark criminal elements he falls into because of that. It's a pretty long film. It's a little over 2 hours, and I was definitely feeling it by the time we were getting close to the end. I was like, wow, I mean, this is kind of, it's not that it's not entertaining, but I definitely felt like there's a lot happening here.
It has some pretty big pacing issues just in terms of like the narrative itself, but
there's a lot they could have cut out.
It's not even that they cut out. I just think they kind of focus on some things that we'll get to more in a bit. I mean, I'll let you speak your thoughts before I get into that.
Sure.
Yeah.
There is a lot the film does to try to like really show the like slavish devotion or performative devotion that this guy has to his masters, and like how he's willing to go to any length. He's a driver for them throughout the film, and how, the lengths he will go to please them, despite like he clearly has like a predilection toward the great socialist in India. Forgot to mention, by the way, that this takes place in like the late 2000s. I mean, it is based on a novel from 2008. And I think what doesn't work about the movie is the progression of this guy. I do not really buy what happens with his character throughout, even though I buy the idea of it, like the idea of it and like what he's fighting against or what he's rebelling against, I should say. It all makes sense. I just think like related to the pacing issues, events following each other, I thought were really disconnected and lacking of motivation that not even the narration could really tie up. That said, I still enjoyed this. I think this is a really decent watch, and as far as Netflix movies go, it's definitely a bit better than most of the ones you'll find that you haven't heard of that happens to be on trending.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm slightly higher in this because I think it's on the verge of being good. I just think the narrative just gets kind of tripped up by the end to the point where it doesn't really meet its full potential. And I think part of that is because it has an issue that becomes of a lot of adaptations, which is it's a lot of telling and not a lot of showing sometimes.
Exactly.
Where it's like the lead character is like just dictating his letter, which I'm assuming is from the book. It's just like kind of like saying a lot of stuff, but it's not often showing it. Sometimes they do. Like there's some kind of interesting like dream or fantasy sequences, but they come about so sporadically and they kind of like come in and out of the narrative that they're kind of confusing at times, because like there'll be long stretches of films where there aren't fantasy sequences, and then like there'll be like 3 right back to back, and it's just like, okay, it's an odd choice. And it comes down to, I think, what's sort of the main issue here which is that the movie, for I want to say like at least like 2/3 of it, is trying to be one thing, and then by like the last like 20 or 30 minutes, it becomes a totally different movie.
It swerves.
Which is fine. Like I think the direction it takes at the end is interesting, but it's just like, this is a completely different movie. Like if you wanted to make that movie, make that movie. Like you're kind of beholden to making this other movie throughout, which is not bad, but it's like, just pick one or the other, because at this point you can't be this movie because we're almost done. Like we're just wrapping up. Like you know, the lights are coming off at this point. So I don't know if that's because, like, I think this is you might have mentioned this already, but I believe the author of this also wrote Slumdog Millionaire.
Well, I was gonna mention that they dig at that movie, you know,
Right.
like they make fun of it in like one of the lines of dialogue, and I was kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, talk about self-deprecation.
Right. Which I think is interesting. Like I like a movie that's like willing to acknowledge the flaws of Slumdog Millionaire, which I like Slumdog Millionaire. I think it's a fine film, but like I think there's room, you know, there's room for criticism there, and if you want to make a movie like that, by all means. But
It
also
just sounds like the author was like on film Twitter for a day,
Right.
and then, you know.
Yeah, it does kind of have a Twitter thread feel at times. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of feels like it's following the kind of progression of the Slumdog Millionaire plot at times. Like it's almost kind of beholden to that in this weird way, where it's like criticizing it, but also trying to like kind of follow a similar narrative format. Even having like a flashback at the beginning of the film, which is odd. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's like, it's not that it's bad. It's just sort of maybe indecisive. Like I think it's trying to be a bunch of different things at once, and the movie just doesn't fully settle on what it's doing. But I think what it is doing at any given time is pretty good and pretty interesting, that I'm not willing to dismiss that. I just think it could have been better.
I agree that it's indecisive. I guess I didn't perceive it as indecisive in terms of the story all the time, because I thought it did have a pretty clear message. I thought what was more decisive to me was the character. I just think what his motivations and what drives him to do certain actions, it felt random, or it felt like certain, like I was saying before, like certain events don't lead gracefully to other events. And because, like you've mentioned, it doesn't really show us through his performance. And I'm not trying to knock down the performance itself. I don't think it's bad or anything.
Yeah, no, I like the performance.
I
I
think
thought they both did a very good job.
I think he's just let down a little bit by the writing, and like he's not given the chance to really like, you know, blossom, you know, his emotion, and like what is actually informing his actions. I think is something that needs to be balanced a bit better in order for it to come through for people, so that when they watch this, they get it and they're able to like this guy and understand his plight. And I think that that's going to be hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's like they don't trust the performance. Maybe that's what's going on, because it feels like so much is over communicated to the point where, like you said, it doesn't fully naturally progress. It just kind of gets to this point where, like, out of nowhere, it's just like, oh, and here's a bunch of things like blah 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 blah, and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. I was like, I wish you developed that more throughout the narrative, because I think that's an interesting progression. I really like the duality of that performance, like we see in these flashback sequences, as opposed to like his uprising. But then, like you said, like I was watching the film, and it's like we're getting to like the last like 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, it's like we're still kind of on this point. Like, why are we like not really getting to this? And it just speeds through that in a way that I found dissatisfying, because I was really interested to learn more about that uprise and like kind of like that progression, even though it was kind of mimicking Scarface at times. Like I still would have liked to have seen more of that change of fate in a way that felt a little bit more natural, like you're saying, or a little bit more even handled. But by the end, I just found that it felt like a lot of good ideas, like a very interesting concept. I would be curious to read the book because of that, but I just don't think the narrative quite sticks the landing enough to make it a full out good film, but still interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I have to agree. And if it sounds like we're coming down pretty hard on it, I think it's because based on, what we've been talking about, I think it really just comes down to the fact that you and I, it's like you said, it has so much potential. Like it could have been so much better, and it gets a lot of things right. So it's all the more frustrating that by the end, I just did not feel like I got out of it what it was really putting in itself, and that's just a shame. So yeah, I'm just kind of like a B- on it, kind of verging on a C+, but I do give it the B- because there's plenty to like, and I think that yeah, if you can overlook some of the shortcomings, I'm sure that it'll be a decent experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also B minus, but I'm verging on a B. Like, I think there's a lot to appreciate here, and I do like the style of it. I just think if it was a little bit more decisive and figured out what type of movie it was making from the onset and just stuck to that a little bit more cohesively, I think it would have been a very strong, maybe even a really good film. But as it is, it just kind of feels like a bunch of different things at once. But I do agree that thematically, or at least like in terms of its social and political commentary, I do think it hits a lot of those points with a lot of precision and a lot of pinpoint accuracy, and those are some of the best moments of the film for sure. But yeah, I just feel like inside of that is just like kind of muddled and kind of confused film, nevertheless. So oh well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is The White Tiger. It is available to stream right now on Netflix. Our last film of the week is probably our most unique, I have to say. We talked about kind of a conventional Western that, definitely had a lot going for it. We kind of talked about an Indian-based epic that, it has a lot of themes. It has a lot of ideas in it that we've seen discovered in plenty of other films. But our last film here is Derek Delgadio's In and of Itself, which is kind of a lot of things. It's kind of like a one-man show. It's also like a magic show. And yet it's neither of those things really. It's something that I certainly was not expecting. I'll put it that way. And there's a lot to get into here. And I'm really glad we picked this because I'm so curious to pick your brain about it, Will. This is a documentary that was kind of put together it's on Off-Broadway, or was on Off-Broadway a few years ago. And they filmed multiple performances. And then the movie itself, which is on Hulu, it shows you like in one straight path the show, but then it like weaves back and forth between different audience members because it's very interactive. It's more interactive than your typical one-man show essentially. But the person behind all of this is Derek Delgadio, who is a conceptual magician. He's not really doing magic tricks with abstract ideas. He's doing magic tricks with people and kind of himself. He's telling stories. And I don't want to get into very deep territory here, and I don't want us to reveal much of anything in terms of like the actual setups and like what happens in this, because I think to get something out of this, I think it's really helpful to not know anything about it going in too specifically if possible. But I would say that if you're listening and you're already curious, on that note, just watch it and don't listen to us talk about it, because I think, I don't know, Will, if you're even going to like it, but I say this is a must watch, and you should just watch it sight unseen. Will, what about you though? Am I on an island here?
No.
Who am I?
Well, I can't answer that, but I can tell you you're not on an island because, well, for one, when I went into this, I had no idea what it was going to be. I thought it was just a documentary about a magician. So I was like, okay, I was settling in for something a little bit, like, not even like a performance art piece, just like something of just like, yeah, I did all these cool tricks and like you probably just see a few things. I was like, okay, just kind of an easy watch. nothing that I have to be like super emotionally invested in.
Oh no.
um,
Wow.
which I'm not saying that as a Chris. I'm just saying that like when the movie started and it's like, please put away your phone and all this stuff. I was like, okay, you know, it's a little much. I mean, it's just about a magician, right? And then and then the show this goes on. Like I said, like it does remind me a little bit of American Utopia in that like it does feel like a sort of interactive, kind of close yet also communal look at this very idiosyncratic performer talking and interacting with the audience through his talents. But yeah, I mean, I'm not too far from where you are because I think, like you said, like going into this with even moderate or like modest expectations is the way to go, because I think that's the way you get mostly invested in it. Because similar to the audience, like I feel like he's playing so much against expectations or like, you know, unassuming audiences to the point where like he sort of like downplays his talent or like kind of like acts like he's a little bit more like unprofessional than he actually is, to the point where he can, you know, like kind of like, you know, do like these amazing things off the cuff. But like you said, like beyond that, it's not really just like, hey, here's this cool trick. It's like this like social identity performance crisis art piece where it's like,
yeah, it's about the illusion of not just sleight of hand, but like the illusion of people, which is like brilliant. Like that is such a great connection I've never really considered before.
But also like this sort of like memoir in the form of stage art as well, where it's like, you know, he's trying to find himself in the process. And that might also just be an illusion, like we said, as well. But at the same time, like it does, you know, help the audience loosen up and, you know, feel like they are a part of the show and in a way that they may not anticipate going in, which is beautiful in its own sort of weird way. But yeah, I mean, not what I expected, to say the least. But yeah, I really got a lot out of this, and I can see why it's affecting a lot of people in the movie and also watching the movie. So yeah,
I got a lot out of it too. I think it kind of like reached into my soul a little bit and made me like confront things I hadn't had to think about in a long time, which was difficult but probably needed. And I think what'll probably work for people, even if you watch it and I could see people kind of being overly skeptical, like you are like with a magic show and really trying to figure everything out that happens, you know, to the detriment of enjoying the show. I think even on that level, man, this guy is just good at telling stories. Like he is a master at just getting you to listen to a story, understand the in and outs, and then connect to it emotionally. Dude should work for Pixar is what I'm saying, because like he has like the succinct storytelling tenacity of like Pete Docter, it seems like to me.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I want to champion as well is Frank Oz's approach. Like I think
he worked on the actual stage production too. I looked up. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
He was part of like putting that together, and he did the film. So that's why I think it's so seamless.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that like something I've talked about before that I think really needs to be pointed out is that directing stage in a cinematic way is super hard. Like it can't be underestimated, like how hard it is to make a stage production work on screen. And I do think Frank Oz does it in a pretty seamless fashion where like you feel like you're watching a stage show, but you also feel involved with it, but you're also close to the performer and you get like, you know, a lot of interesting angles and like different perspectives, but it doesn't take you out of the show at the same time. And that's a really hard thing to do. And I think that Frank Oz does it pretty seamlessly here. And I think that's even more impressive for me because I feel like as a director, Frank Oz, I've kind of gone back and forth on a lot of his directorial efforts. Like I like Little Shop of Horrors a lot. Like I think that's a really great musical, but like something like Death at a Funeral, I'm not crazy about, and a few of his other comedies, I'm not super invested in. So I wasn't really sure what to expect from him as a director, but I thought he did a great job filming this and presenting it in a very cinematic and engaging way for sure.
Yeah, you know, again, don't want to talk about specific stuff, but there is a moment in this where he just like gets a hug. And I think, you know, I didn't know anything about this guy going into this documentary, but seeing him and even calling it a documentary feels weird. It's kind of like a concert film, but just seeing him get that hug, I was just so happy for him. Mm-hmm. Like, and I don't know this guy. Like, as far as I know, everything about him is a lie.
Yeah. You don't know him from Adam.
Exactly. Right. But no, it's just there's this like nature to his approach that, you know, there were times where like it struck me as like man, this guy would be a really good cult leader. Like, he kind of uses the affect of like a cult leader who is trying to like manipulate and control people's emotions. Not to bring up Pixar again, but like, dude could, like, if he wanted to, he would probably be able to get people to do anything. And instead, he uses his powers for off-Broadway productions, which is far more worthwhile in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we should be grateful for that for sure. For a lot of reasons. But
President Delgado.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. But I mean, like this is something as well, like we were mentioning, like if this wasn't a film, like I wouldn't know anything about this. Like I would go my whole life just not knowing what the show is, anything about it. And I'm really glad that this movie exists because, like, like we were saying, like if I didn't even ask you about this or I didn't have time to watch it, I probably would have let this gone by too. So I'm really grateful that this exists and that Hulu was able to stream it because
we have to thank Abby, because Abby's the one who raised it to our attention. So
yeah, for sure. But I think it works really well in the streaming format as well because like we're saying, like it's presented in a visually interesting way, but it's not something that like demands to be seen on the big screen. Like I think it works really well on TV and it does its job well. And I think this is the type of content I want to see more of from streamers because I think it allows us to see these stage productions that otherwise, I would probably never get to see because I don't live in New York and I don't have access to these type of things. But, they help to bring a communal experience and, I really appreciate that. So I want more stuff like that.
Same here. So I'm pretty high on this. I'm an A-. It's incredibly good. I can see why it's high up for people as well. I know it's got like a pretty high Rotten Tomato score. What about you?
Yeah, I mean it's very early in the year, and I don't know where I'm going to be in December, but I would not be surprised if this ends up in my top 10 because I really liked it as well, and it completely caught me off guard.
Yeah,
but I'm really glad we checked this out. So I'm a pretty high A- as well.
It's funny because too we were so close to being like, Will, you should watch Our Friend.
Yeah.
Which I'm not. I don't think you would have disliked or anything.
Yeah, I probably would have thought it was fine. But I think this is the better one of the two that I had the option of watching for sure.
I mean, I say that, but I can say that because I watch both movies.
Right.
But
sure, fair enough.
Regardless, yes. Hope you all enjoyed this episode of Cinemaholics. Looking forward to the Sundance Festival this coming week. You probably won't hear from Will and myself until afterward.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll have some kind of episode out. We are doing an extra milestone this week, so if you want to watch along with us, we're going to be discussing City Lights. So keep your eyes peeled for that episode of the show coming soon. And I got nothing else, Will, and I didn't have anything to plug this week. I got Sundance on the brain, but did you have anything to plug before we call it a show?
I don't know when it's coming out, but I do know, like I mentioned last week, our episode of Fanny Ogre, Toots Ogre season 5 is coming out, if not Monday, sometime this week. So I'm really excited to unveil that and all the artwork that comes along with it. So by the time you're listening to this, if you're not listening to it live, it may be out. And if it is, I definitely recommend checking it out because the season is going to be nuts. But that may or may not be in your feed right now, but if it's not, it's going to be there soon, so look out for that.
I thought it was already supposed to be out. I checked the other day and I was like, I'm ready to hear Master of Disguise.
Sure.
What did they think? And then nope, it wasn't there. So.
It's recorded and it should be finished soon. It's just not quite there, but it will be soon. So check out.
Gotta be patient. Be patient. All right, thank you everybody. We'll see you all next week from the Internet California. I am John Negroni.
And for Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.